Hey people, I'm Marc Ryan, licensed acupuncturist and herbalist from Hashimoto'sHealing.com. And welcome to today's webinar on Hashimoto's and oral tolerance. I'm super excited to be sharing this material with you. And you know, this month, February, we are celebrating the 3rd anniversary of launching Hashimoto's Healing. And I'll also be releasing the 2nd edition of my book, Roadmap to Remission, with a brand new foreword by Dr. Karazian and some new material in it. If you've read the book and you'd like to leave a review for us or share your experience, please head over to Amazon at some point and do that. It would mean the world to me if you could leave us an honest review. You know, I feel so blessed to have grown personally and professionally through this process and to be a resource for so many people who are looking for a different approach from the conventional medical model. And, you know, really, I think we're part of a new movement in healthcare. And that movement includes many different approaches and things like biohacking, you know, like where we use data and technology and research and shared knowledge like we're doing today to not just heal, but to actually achieve optimal physical and cognitive performance and health. You know, when I started out on my own Hashimoto's journey, I just wanted to get better. But today, I want to go beyond that, and I want to perform at a really high level. You know, the goal of remission almost feels like I'm selling myself short in some sense. And that's my intention for this webinar today. Let's not put a ceiling on this. Remission is an achievable goal, but so is optimal performance and experiencing unprecedented levels of health and well-being. You know, I think we're incredibly fortunate to be living in a time, and we're just at the beginning of learning what is possible. So let's dream big, people. Let's go beyond remission. The sky is the limit. We can do it. Okay, so let's get started. We've got a ton to cover today. I suggest you get a pen and paper so you can take some notes because there's a lot of information on recovering. And afterwards, we're going to be opening it up to a Q&A, so I'll answer your questions. So if questions come up during the presentation, please write them down and we'll get to them afterwards. This week, I actually had a major epiphany, and I think it's important enough that I want to share it with you. It's a concept called oral tolerance. And Dr. Karazian, who's my teacher and mentor for many years, first introduced me to the idea of oral tolerance at this year's Thyroid Mastermind. And I've spent like the last few months combing through the medical literature and learning about its significance and how it impacts Hashimoto's and how it also, you know, impacts reactions to foods. And in doing so, I recently had this realization, and it's changed my entire way of thinking about how we can use the diet and this whole process of healing, especially reintroducing foods. So in this video, I'm going to go deep into what I've learned, and I want to explain the idea to you because I think it's super valuable. And, you know, one thing I've learned is that diet really is the foundation of success, and I think many of you have seen this, you know, and the reason this is true, in my opinion, is the digestive tract is ground zero for autoimmunity, right? We know that the breakdown of the barrier of the intestines is the pathway to autoimmune disease, right? When you get leaky gut, you know, all this breaks down, the tight junctions break down, and you get autoimmunity. And it's definitely a causative factor, this leaky gut and this breakdown, but it's not the whole story. Really, that's kind of like the door, you know, but behind that, there's an entire landscape of immune reactions and things going on. And that's what I've been looking at in this research. You know, so let's talk about the idea of tolerance. First, autoimmunity, what is it? Well, really, it's our immune system has lost the ability to differentiate between our own cells and foreign invaders like pathogens, you know, bacteria, viruses, fungi, candida, things like that. And this confusion has led to our immune system attacking our body's own proteins. And, you know, this is caused by our immune system losing the ability to have tolerance to these different tissues, which are made of proteins, right? And the entire digestive tract is made up of multiple little ecosystems, and all of these little ecosystems are constantly battling with this problem of tolerance, right? Because the gut is essentially, it's one long open tube, and there's lots of pathogens and lots of stuff that goes through there. There's bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, all that stuff. And there's also all the proteins that we eat and ingest and get nourishment from. So So an important part of this whole process of digestion and the immune system protecting it is this ebb and flow of tolerance, and it's called oral tolerance. Oral, like your mouth. Oral tolerance is defined by your immune system not reacting locally and systemically to these different pathogens such as food proteins. In other words, when you have oral tolerance, it's like you eat a certain protein and you become tolerant to that protein. You don't react. And we can think of this in terms of our own evolution, right? Because if you eat something, some sort of protein all the time, it'd be a really good thing for you to develop a tolerance to it and not attack it, right? And our diets were not that varied as we evolved, so we're eating the same kind of foods over and over again. We're more likely to survive if we can build tolerance to them. And proteins are the things we're most often exposed to. They are the building blocks of life, after all. Well, it turns out that tolerance to ingested proteins, ones we eat, is also really important for the barrier function in the intestines, and that's one of the things that prevents leaky gut. And as we talked about earlier, when this tolerance breaks down, that's when you get chronic diseases. You get celiac disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and you get all these other systemic autoimmune diseases like MS and Hashimoto's. So, in other words, oral tolerance is a kind of dimmer switch, right? It turns down the attack, both in the intestines and in the rest of the body. And when you have oral tolerance, your immune system doesn't attack as aggressively. But when you lose this oral tolerance, you can wind up with things like celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease, or other systemic problems. So how does this work? Well, we don't fully understand it yet, but here's what we do know. That oral tolerance works by deactivating T and B cells that target our tissues. Right? So it calms down certain immune cells. It either clears them out or gets rid of them and makes them not respond to these different proteins. And this is a process called anergy. So energy with an A, A-N-E-R-G-Y. And anergy is the lack of a normal immune response to a particular antigen or allergen. And oral tolerance works with TREGs, which are T regulatory cells, to suppress them and calm them down. And T regulatory cells are called suppressor T cells, right? They are cells that modulate the immune system. They maintain tolerance to self-antigens. They discourage the development of autoimmune disease. They calm all these different aspects of our immune system. You can see in this diagram, right? They calm Th1, Th2, Th17, all the things that are responsible for autoimmunity. They calm T cell migration to the tissues, so they calm attacks. They make the dendritic cells that line the intestines more tolerant. They suppress IgE, that's the allergic response. They inhibit these different effector cells like eosinophils, basophils, mast cells. So these TREGs are super important for calming this entire immune reaction. And these are often kind of depressed when you lose oral tolerance. So, right, of course, with autoimmune disease, this may be a really important thing, right? If we can calm this, if possible. And the question is, can we establish or reestablish, or at the very least, improve oral tolerance and maybe diminish the autoimmune attack as a result? Well, some researchers believe that the yes is the answer to this. And there's some evidence that this may be an achievable goal. So, of course, the question is, what do we do to improve this? This is a very, very important question, because it's also a pretty potentially dangerous game, right? It's not easy and risk-free. Because, example, what should we establish tolerance for? Should we establish tolerance for gluten and dairy then? These are dietary proteins with tremendous destructive potential. Well, I don't know. My feeling is no. We still should not try and establish tolerance to those, because they've been implicated in destruction of brain tissue and myelin, and we're not going to be able to fully control this. So I think the risk there is too great. But there's tons of other things that we want to try to establish tolerance to, and dairy is maybe debatable. In the end, we want to do no harm and not hurt ourselves any further. So I just want to explore this whole process right now and what is actually involved in that. Another interesting thing the research has shown is that simply establishing this tolerance is not enough. Right? We have to do these other things that we've been working on. We have to reduce inflammation. We have to strengthen the regulatory part of the immune system. We have to calm and eliminate stress. We have to restore integrity and balance to the ecosystem of the gut. We got to do all these other things too. Like, it's not enough to just dampen things. Okay, so let's look at this big picture. What are the steps to first calming the immune system, then secondly to trying to improve this oral tolerance? Frankly, I'm still trying to figure this out, but in going through all this different research, I think I've got some ideas. So step one is the elimination diet. This is what we've all done, right? Because what are we doing with this diet? Well, we removed all these offending proteins that our immune system is reacting to, right? We moved grains and nuts and seeds and legumes and nightshades and gluten and dairy and soy and eggs. All these things cause reactions. And this is a very effective approach for reducing the systemic inflammation and for calming the immune system. Right? And we've seen over and over again, it doesn't work with everybody, but for a lot of people with Hashimoto's, many of the important thyroid markers get better. Antibody levels come down, THS normalizes, T3 and T4 levels normalize. And often people lose weight, the brain fog improves, their mood improves, their energy improves. So there's a lot of good things happen from it. And when we go through this process, we've also looked at these other systems of the body and how they're impacted, right? And for many of us, we detox the liver, we work on healing the adrenals, we reduce the systemic inflammation on the brain. All this is important stuff, right? So we know this is a multi-system problem, and we need to do this multi-system approach, which is what we've done thus far. And being on this diet provides us with a tremendous opportunity to aggressively reduce this inflammation, to clean up the liver, to heal the gut, to deal with stress in the adrenals. But one thing I've observed with a lot of people who've tried this autoimmune paleo diet is it can actually increase sensitivity to foods that you're sensitive to. And for sometimes people who the food they didn't have a big reaction to in the past, they'll now have a much more severe reaction because it's been eliminated for a prolonged period of time. And in some cases, the elimination can actually increase sensitivity to foods across the board, like all these different foods. And one thing I've observed too is it seems to get more and more intense with time. Like, right, the longer people are on a strict elimination diet, some of them become more and more sensitive. Well, one thing I realize is what may be happening here is that this elimination of these antigens has actually led to a decrease in oral tolerance for these people. And this makes logical sense because oral tolerance requires exposure to these antigens, right? These dietary proteins. So I did a survey on Facebook. I didn't get a ton of responses, but I got about 40, I think. And a lot of people said they had this problem. And another thing to think about this, it's extremely stressful to not be able to eat anything. Stress. We know stress is a big problem. And having to stress every time you have to sit down to eat, and when you're going out and doing other things, it's like super stressful. So I think we got to find a solution to this. And there's also evidence in the medical literature that elimination diet does raise sensitivity. In some cases, researchers blame it on anaphylaxis, which is like a severe, life-threatening allergic reaction. And also many researchers and health professionals now think, well, maybe it's not such a good idea to not expose children to things like peanuts in early childhood, because that lack of exposure may be the thing that led to this massive anaphylactic shock and serious responses once they get older. Once they get past the age of 6, it seems to be. Okay, so why is all this happening? What's the mechanism that could lead to this decline of oral tolerance? Well, I don't know exactly, but I think the simple answer is that elimination of all this multiple immune stimulating antigens, it changes the entire landscape of the immune system. Right? It calms these T regulatory cells, or eliminates some of them. And while this is really good, arguably, necessary with autoimmunity, we have to calm the immune system. I think maybe what we're seeing here is an unintended consequence. And this is a great illustration of how complex the immune system is. It has all these different parts. It moves in multiple directions, and changing one thing, isn't always all good. We've got to get over this simplistic linear thinking. Like, it's three-dimensional. So this has made me really rethink the whole reintroduction phase. Right? Once we've done the elimination phase, usually 30, 60 days, the next phase, and many of us are here now, involves reintroducing foods, one food at a time, so that you see how you react to them. And here's what's going to happen. Some people are going to have, react to a ton of stuff because you've been so good at eliminating these things and accomplishing some really good things with regard to calming the immune system. And people who have introduced the autoimmune paleo approach say, okay, this phase is essentially, it's a test phase where you can see what you can and cannot eat. And even some people, when I did the Facebook thing, they rationalize this increased sensitivity by saying, well, no, this is part of the healing process, and they said, well, once you heal your gut, you will have fewer sensitivities. But this isn't always true. I know there are a number of people who have spent several years healing their guts, and they still find that they're sensitive to a number of foods. So obviously everyone's a little different, and some people do better than others, and some people find they can reintroduce all sorts of things, while others can introduce just a few things, and then there's still others who, their diet is just becoming more and more restrictive and more restrictive. And if you're one of those people, then this process can be really demoralizing and super stressful. Because here you've worked your butt off to be super compliant, you've done everything right, you've followed the plan, and the end result is you can eat basically nothing. It's the living embodiment of the expression, no good deed goes unpunished. Okay, so I'm rethinking this phase and thinking maybe this is better to think of it as the reestablishment of oral tolerance phase, right? Instead of just eliminating and seeing what happens during reintroduction, we have an amazing opportunity here. And that's to reestablish or improve oral tolerance and create a much more hospitable immune environment in the gut and systemically. So how do we do that? Firstly, what improves oral tolerance? This is a question that's not so easy to answer because creating tolerance is different depending on what you want to create tolerance for, right? For example, creating tolerance for a Th2 system issue like almond or peanut allergy, which is an IgE type allergy, is very different than creating tolerance for someone with a Th1 condition, which some Hashimoto's people have. Right, so we got to figure out what we're trying to do. And we know T regulatory cells are really important for this whole process. Right? These cells, tolerance in the intestine requires these T regulatory cells, and these are found in the intestinal lining. And these regulatory cells are created in response to proteins that pass through the intestines. T regulatory cells that are created in the gut, they suppress this local immune response. What basically happens is this. Immune cells in the gut take proteins to the lymph nodes, which line the intestinal area. There's a lot of them there. And with the help of certain molecules like vitamin A, TGF-beta, interleukin 10, they program these T cells to be regulatory cells. And these T regulatory cells spread throughout the gut, and they suppress the local immune response. Right? What that means is they basically turn off or turn down, kind of like a dimmer switch, the immune reaction to these proteins that we're eating. And because the lymphatic system travels throughout the body, the theory is that you get this information is shared with the entire immune system. And then it stops attacking that protein. Right? Remember from the metal element, we see there's those lymph glands all over the place. And two immune proteins that are really critical for this are TGF-beta and interleukin 10. And in researching this topic, I discovered that there were a number of Chinese herbs. This is one formula that kept coming up and over again that increases interleukin 10. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. All right, there's a few supplements that I think are worth taking a look at. The first one is butyrate. This is a short-chain fatty acid. It's an important food for the cells in the colon, and it's also really important for maintaining oral tolerance. There's a product we have in our store called Enterovite. It contains butyrate and vitamin E and calcium, which will help feed the good bacteria in your colon. Excellent formula. Another thing is cod liver oil. Cod liver oil has vitamin A, it has vitamin D3, it has DHA, and these are all critical for oral tolerance and immune balance. Probiotics are also really important. There's a few different species I put in the post. You'll see B. infantis, Lactobacillus casei, and Lactococcus lactis. Those kept coming up in the research, so we've got to find a blend. I haven't yet to find a blend that has them in it, but those are good. Something else to consider is called ursolic acid. This is commonly found in fruit peels, in rosemary, and in thyme. It's also helpful in maintaining oral tolerance, used also in the treatment of obesity. This clears out T cells that attack our body. This is an interesting finding too, because if I remember from last week, we talked about modified citrus pectin, which also comes from fruit peels, has the opposite effect. Interesting. The Chinese herbal formula I mentioned is called Liu Wei Di Huang Wan. This is a base formula for about a dozen different formulas. And one of the main ingredients, Romania, has showed to really benefit the thyroid, to modulate immune cells in a number of beneficial ways. It helps to boost interleukin 10 and something called CCAMP. Some additions to this formula can enhance its ability to modulate the immune system. Like I found cinnamon cortex, which is kind of the bark of cinnamon, and immature orange peel called Zershur. Both help modulate the immune system and help promote oral tolerance. And Zershur has actually been shown to boost these T regulatory cells too. This was a really interesting discovery for me because this formula is not normally thought of in the context of digestive or autoimmune issues. But when we look at the pharmacology, it really reveals that it's effective in modulating the immune response, in clearing out these circulating immune complexes, and helping to reestablish this oral tolerance. That was very cool. Another interesting thing that we saw in this thing was actually taking thyroid gland. And some researchers have attempted to induce oral tolerance in people with autoimmune thyroid disease, but the results were really mixed. What they found was there is no change in antibodies, but there were changes in other markers in cellular immunity, which is really interesting. Kind of confirms that the antibody numbers don't always reflect the rest of the immune system. And the antibody numbers may not be as important as what's going on in the other parts of the immune system that are actually attacking. And that approach seemed to diminish those immune cells. There's also evidence of T regulatory depletion in thyroid autoimmunity. So interesting. We want to boost those. That might help thyroid autoimmunity too. Curcumin, very helpful in oral tolerance, and of course reducing inflammation. Turmeric, super helpful. Quercetin reduces oxidative stress, interleukin 6. Cinnamon kept coming up over and over again. It's a potent anti-inflammatory. It helps regulate blood sugar. Helps boost interleukin 10. For mucus in the intestines, I listed a number of things, but slippery elm I saw a number of times, so that's something to consider, taking slippery elm bark. And then exercise. Exercise has been shown to accomplish exactly what we need to do to improve oral tolerance. Right? It helps reduce interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and increase interleukin 10. So for the gut, moderate exercises that stimulate and strengthen the core and the abdomen are quite helpful. So yoga, Pilates, fire breathing, Qigong, excellent for this. And also the amount and the intensity of the exercise matters, right? Like with everything, we've talked about this before. You don't want to do too much, or for too long. That's counterproductive and actually weakens immune function. But doing it regularly is clearly beneficial. I looked at one large review. It has this like big consensus statement on exercise, and it summed it up like this. Right? During acute exercise, there's also marked increase in adrenaline, in cortisol, in growth hormone, in prolactin, and other factors that have a calming effect on the immune system. Taken together, it appears that each bout of exercises induces an anti-inflammatory environment. So again, got to do it the right way, but it really helps. But mostly today, I wanted to focus on how are we going to do this? Because that's the tricky part. Right? I don't have all the answers, but I do have a few ideas, and I want to talk about those. And first, starting with dietary strategies for improving oral tolerance. One of the first things to understand is it's really important that you get this concept that only dietary proteins large enough to elicit an immune response are potential food allergens. So if we break them down, they don't cause trouble. Right? So what does that? Proper stomach acid levels, pepsin and digestive enzymes. All of this matters when we're dealing with Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, because a lot of people have issues with too little stomach acid and too little gastrin secretion that's caused by hypothyroidism. So we got to really make sure we have enough HCl and stomach acid breaking these things down. We may want to experiment with some digestive enzymes to break down the proteins when reintroducing these foods. That may be one of the things to keep reactions to a minimum. And we've got to be careful here again. It's always about balance. If you have leaky gut, you may have exposed proteins, and some of the digestive enzymes that degrade proteins further may affect the lining of your gut. So kind of a judgment call here of have we healed the gut enough to take that step. But that's something worth trying, I think. Again, the elimination diet is the ideal time to work on healing this intestinal lining. That's what we've been doing. And this should be done first, and then we do the reintroduction phase, and in that phase, we want to try to improve this oral tolerance. And so that brings up an important question. How do we know if we've healed your gut enough to go to the next phase? Right? What if you haven't achieved 100% remission or 100% reduction of symptoms? What if you still feel like you have more work to do? I mean, I don't have a definitive answer. I think this is a long-term project. It involves returning to the strict elimination periodically. I think we got to think of this as cyclic and bigger picture. Like, it's not going to be over after this. Right? I think there's some evidence that people who stay longer on a really strict elimination diet and don't attempt to do any reintroduction, I think there's a more possibility of continued reactions and increased sensitivity and lower oral tolerance. So I think we got to weigh that when we're making this, right? So it's a judgment call. If you haven't had any improvements, I think there's still an argument for continuing with the elimination diet and continuing to dig and continuing to look, okay, what, are there other things we need to heal? Are there infections? Are there candida? Is there other stuff? If you had some improvement, but it's not 100%, then we're going to have to decide when you're ready. We got to make that, at the end of the day, at some point, we have to try this. Another thing to consider is lower protein. A surprising finding in the research was that less protein seems to encourage oral tolerance. We've used a lot of animal protein because it's very healing for the gut and it's healing, just in general. But it may not be as helpful in this phase. So one of the things we want to think about is maybe reducing overall amounts of dietary protein. Because one of the things that all these foods do is they can lead to histamine intolerance. This is one problem that people have. So maybe after a period of gut healing, which is a judgment call how long we need to do it, and emphasizing these meat and animal products, well, maybe we need to kind of refocus back a little more vegetables and more variety. Right? What the research suggests is about 20% protein. I think this is like a balance thing. Think of this as a balance of yin and yang. You can't stay in either one for too long without consequences. Right? So the pendulum's got to swing back. Another thing to do is incorporate something called resistant starches. Resistant starches are really interesting. They become popular in paleo circles. There are two types of resistant starches, and both are helpful for restoring this oral tolerance. The first is starch that has high amylose content, right, which can't be digested in its raw state. So you'll find this in potatoes, in green unripe bananas, in plantains. And when you cook these foods, it causes these changes in these starches and makes them digestible, and that kind of removes the resistant aspect. The second is also known as retrograde resistant starch because this forms when it's cooked and then cooled. Right? These cooked and cooled foods can then be reheated at low temperatures, less than 130 degrees, and they maintain this resistant quality. Heating at higher temperatures will convert that starch again into a digestible form, so we want to avoid too overheating when we redo it. So examples of this are cooked and parboiled rice, cooked and cooled potatoes. You can do the same with potatoes. Cooked and cooled soaked and sprouted legumes too. So it's this process you can use for all these different things. Another really interesting thing to note in consuming these resistant starches, it allows for increased production of butyrate that we talked about earlier, right? Again, butyrate feeds the intestine, acts like a powerful anti-inflammatory agent in our colon, functions to improve the integrity of our gut by decreasing leaky gut, and it keeps toxins in the gut out of the bloodstream. So it's super important, butyrate. How do we add these starches? Well, some of the common sources of resistant starches include green bananas, unripe ones, plantains, properly prepared and cooked parboiled rice or legumes, cooked and cooled potatoes. But if you're on a low carbohydrate diet and you don't tolerate these foods well, then one thing you can do is just add resistant starch to like a smoothie or something. Bob's Red Mill has an unmodified potato starch, and apparently it's one of the best sources of resistant starch. You take about 8 grams of that is in a tablespoon. According to Chris Kresser, this is very well tolerated by most people, even those who might react adversely to nightshades. Plantain flour and green banana flour are also excellent sources. And you may want to alternate them so you don't just have one source that you might develop a reaction to. These are pretty bland in flavor, and you can put them in a cold or room temperature drink with coconut milk or mix them into smoothies. And remember, if you want to have the benefit of the resistant starch, you should not heat them above 130 degrees. So next up, what's the process for improving it when reintroducing foods, this oral tolerance? And I think in terms of strategy, this is another area that's really highly individualized, and there's all these variations in genetic makeup, and immune profiles, and autoimmunity, so it's impossible to predict every variation. So understand we're going to have to try some things, use the APART system that I taught you in my book, do this in as scientific and systematic way as we can, right? Ask and assess, prioritize and plan, act and adapt, reassess, reevaluate, and then try again. Also in the book that I gave you last week, we talked about the Reintroducing Foods on the Autoimmune Paleo Protocol by Eileen Laird. There's a 5-step method for reintroducing foods, and this follows a more effective gradual induction process for creating oral tolerance that I mentioned last week and in the first part of the blogs. I'd like to go over some of these now, and I also want to add some of my own suggestions to this approach. And bear in mind, again, this is highly individualized, and we're going to have to experiment. There's no definitive answers here. We're just going to have to try some stuff, and we may have some unexpected results. So first, what foods should we add? Well, in that book, Eileen Laird quotes Sarah Ballantyne, who has these 4 stages of reintroduction, and her goal is to increase your nutrition as fast as possible with foods that your body is likely to accept sooner than others. And she's divided these reintroductions into 4 stages. Stage 1 has egg yolks, fresh legumes like peas and green beans, fruit-based spices, seed-based spices, seed and nut oils, and grass-fed ghee. And there are examples in the book of all of these. Okay, so that's the safest general one. Stage 2 is when you can start in with the seeds and nuts. I would recommend soaking them before you do that. Cacao for all you chocolate fans. Egg whites. Here you could add grass-fed butter. And if you're really dying to have some alcohol, alcohol could be attempted. Another thing to remember about alcohol, though, is that it is counterproductive for creating oral tolerance. So we'll put a question mark in alcohol. Stage 3, you can add some cashews and pistachios, coffee if you really want to try it, grass-fed cream, fermented dairy, eggplant, sweet bell peppers, paprika. So she recommends, trying dairy. Again, this is highly individualized. Some people can do dairy, some people can't. I think it's an area of caution and some debate. So I think the jury's still out on dairy. I think it's something, if you really feel like you want to try it, it's something we can try. Grass-fed whole milk, grass-fed cheese, chili peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, nightshade spices, white rice, more alcohol, soaked sprouted legumes, soaked and sprouted grains, and any foods that you've reacted to strongly in the past are all in this final category. Now, this is really kind of a best guess by Sarah Ballantyne. She's a really smart person, but again, there's so many variables, who knows? So I think it's important to remember everyone's unique when it comes to food introductions, and you might be able to introduce, all the nuts and seeds in stages 1 to 3, but not be able to reintroduce eggs, for example. That may happen. You're going to have to just trial and error here. When it comes to nightshades, potatoes might be better tolerated than paprika, but so you don't have to hold yourself to this, but it's a good place to kind of start. And the stage 1 reintroductions really include 2 nutritional powerhouses that are very beneficial if you can tolerate them: egg yolks and grass-fed ghee. Right? These are really rich. Ghee is a great source of fat. So something to think about. Stage 4 reintroductions may surprise everyone because, like I said, it includes foods that are not often on the paleo diet, like grains and legumes. And remember, it's super important how you prepare them. I've put instructions on that. You want to soak them and cook them in a certain way. And also, once you do cook them, cool them to try to make them more resistant. I'd say that these foods are often the foods that are included in the 80-20 version of paleo, so like that 20% where you just have what you want. I think also one caveat to these reintroductions are, that they're only recommended if you achieve full remission to autoimmune disease and feel in optimal health. Well, again, this is kind of a judgment call. Like, well, what if you're not there at 100%? I don't know many people who've gotten there completely 100% all the time. I feel like I'm there, but some days I'm not 100%. So that means like I should have stopped. I don't know. I think this is a judgment call. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision to try this. And I think one place I differ with this all or nothing approach is that real life is nuanced. That's what we're seeing with this research. There's nothing preventing you from doing some reintroducing and then returning to more restrictions again. So I think we should think of this as cyclic and sort of longer, bigger picture. Right? We've seen, because there are consequences to not reintroducing. We see that with people. That's what I did a survey on Facebook. That's what I found in the research. And for some people, like not reintroducing creates more sensitivities and more problems. So I think there's got to be a kind of balance here of a back and forth in trying this. So I think we need to make some attempts. We need to keep track. We need to see where we are. Some foods may be okay, others may not. And I also don't necessarily agree with this all or nothing approach. Right? You may find you have some things you can have once or twice a month and be okay with it. Right? That doesn't mean you have to do it never. It shouldn't be every day or nothing. Okay. Now let's talk about the actual reintroduction process. First, step 1, you want to prepare the food that you want to reintroduce. Make sure you give thought to how you prepare it to minimize reactions. And the best way to prepare foods to minimize reactions and to create this oral tolerance is to soak them and then cook them and cook and cool them and reheat them below 130 degrees. Again, makes the starches like starch in rice more resistant and less reactive. And it's also important to understand that raw proteins are different from heated cooked proteins, and even the type of cooking can make a difference. For example, some people cannot tolerate raw eggs or fried eggs or eggs cooked in an omelet, but they can tolerate eggs cooked in baked goods. Right? And in this case, the temperature and the length of time that they're cooked result in the proteins becoming denatured. That's why that happens. So cooking matters. Step 2, start with a series of tiny bites, which are going to minimize the risk of intense reactions. Little bits. Right? So first just eat like half a teaspoon and wait 15 minutes. And if you have no reaction, eat a full teaspoon and wait another 15 minutes. So start really small. Right? If you have no reaction, eat 1.5 teaspoons. Then wait a few hours. If still no reaction, then proceed. Right? If at any point you get a negative reaction, stop. That doesn't necessarily mean never try again. Stop for that period of time. And when working to establish tolerance, the goal is a diminished response over time. So I think we want to also think about incorporating some of the strategies we talked about above, some of these things like turmeric and other things that maybe can help us have a lesser reaction. All right, the step 3 is now you get to eat a normal sized portion of the food. You did that little test, it was okay. Then you can go on and have a normal sized portion. Savor it and enjoy it. Don't binge, don't eat massive amounts, because that can cause a reaction, right? Just because we're not ready for it. So go from a little bit to a normal amount, not a crazy amount. Eat a normal sized portion, right? Moderation in everything, including moderation. All right, step 4, stop eating the food altogether and watch for symptoms over the next 3 days. All right, go back to the elimination. Reactions can happen anywhere from immediately to a full 2 or 3 days, 72 hours later. And a reaction is an increase in your autoimmune disease symptoms. Could be pain, could be fatigue, could be sleep problems, could be a skin rash, digestive distress, brain fog, moodiness, whatever. Right? Don't rush it, give it time, but also think about trying some of the interventions we talked about above. See if they can decrease or eliminate the reaction. If you do have a negative reaction, you know you're intolerant, and you probably should avoid that food. So wait for the symptom to pass before reintroducing another food, so you have a kind of a clear baseline for reintroduction. Also, when choosing foods, we want to evaluate the destructive potential of that food and see if there are any interventions that we talked about, again, that may help calm the reaction. So like turmeric, other things that are anti-inflammatory, the digestive enzymes. I think those should be a part of this whole experiment. And if you have no reaction to the food, then it's potentially safe for you to eat, and you can go on to step 5. Step 5 is you eat a little bit of that food every day for a week. Monitor your body again. Normal portions. Don't binge. Right? Food intolerance seems to come in true forms. There's the strong reaction, where there's no doubt your body reacts negatively to the food. And again, we want to evaluate the destructive potential of this food and see if any of the reactions, are horrible. If they are, we're going to move on to other foods, consider returning to this food at some other time, just like kind of put it on the shelf. The second type of reaction is a cumulative inflammatory response that starts off mild, but then becomes noticeable after daily consumption. Right? So this food is safer to attempt to establish tolerance, and maybe we can find a happy medium where you can have the food once or twice a month, periodically, not every day. That's another way to think about it. If after eating the food for a week, your body still feels good, then you know the food's not a problem. You can reintroduce the next one. And that's how we achieve tolerance. Little by little, your immune system adapts to these dietary proteins. Again, one thing to consider is that the foods that you have a lesser reaction to may in fact help you achieve tolerance if they're gradually and sparingly introduced in conjunction with some of the strategies we talked about. So, what other foods should you try to increase tolerance for? Again, I don't have a definitive answer except that we must seek to do as little harm as possible. And the best way to look at that is to look at the few different foods we may want to try to establish tolerance for, consider how destructive they are. Think about it. What about lectins? Lectins is a big question. Should we induce oral tolerance for lectins? Well, it's interesting. If you look at the research, there's little doubt that lectins are an immune stimulant, right? That's why they're the focus of the Illumination diet. Lectins are found in nuts and seeds and legumes and certain grains. And many researchers use these to actually induce an immune response. That's what they use in the laboratory when they do these tests. So this is not just a reaction to a dietary protein. Lectins definitely produce their own inflammatory immune response. But some people can eat them without a problem. So again, think of the destructive potential. How badly do you react to them? This may be something you can eat occasionally. You need to trust what your body tells you. You need to prepare them properly. Why it affects different people in different ways, it probably has to do with multiple factors like genetic profile, the health of your intestines, et cetera, et cetera. So, there are a few things that may help with them. Again, soak them. I give you a detailed description in this document how to do this. Basically, what that does is ferment them, and that helps break down the proteins. Remember HCl with pepsin. This won't completely break them down, but it does help partially break them down. So make sure you have enough stomach acid. Digestive enzymes, same thing here. We'll partially break them down, may not completely break them down, but again, the cumulative effect of all these different things will help. And again, think about the destructive potential. How badly do you react to them? This may be something you can eat occasionally. You need to trust what your body is telling you, and you need to keep track of your reactions. And again, should we try to reduce reactions? This is something I go back and forth on. I think there's value to this. I think there's benefit to doing a test alone, trying a food just alone and see what happens. And I think there's also value in experimenting with some of these things, like butyrate, like the Chinese herbs, like anti-inflammatories like turmeric and resveratrol, like digestive enzymes. I mean, I think it's okay for us test alone and then test with some of these other things and see if there's a difference. If we can reduce the inflammation and reduce the negative response, it's not a bad thing. But I think we need to do it alone first to just see how we do. Right? But I think it's completely makes sense to try and reduce the negative reaction. Especially if you have a bad reaction, why suffer? Take something to help reduce it. Right, so you can see there's a good deal of experimentation to be done here, but I think this information will give you a good framework and a good reference and starting point. All right, we're going to go live now, but here's what I want to do first. I want to first share something with you that I created, and then talk about one final thing, which I think is critically important for improving oral tolerance and breaking through the ceiling of what is possible. And finally, we're going to open things up to some Q&A. I'm going to answer your questions, and I'll be here as long as it takes to get them all answered. All right, so first of all, I always say to my son, if you have no plan, you plan to fail. And do you ever feel like you're kind of blindly trying to recover from Hashimoto's with no real sense of direction? Well, I want to change that for you. And if it's okay, I'd like to share my idea for doing this. So here's what we went through today, what we went over. Right? We've looked at this concept of oral tolerance and how increasing it may really have benefits for not just helping with food sensitivity, but also with healing autoimmunity. This may be a piece of the puzzle that helps create a more hospitable immune environment in your body. And if we can do that, this can give you some momentum to take the next steps. Well, if you don't have the next steps thought out and you don't have a clear path and kind of intention of where you want to go, it's hard to put them into motion. You're kind of all dressed up with no place to go, you know what I'm saying? Well, I want to help you create a plan. And not just a one-size-fits-all thing. I want to help you create a plan that is unique to you and your unique set of circumstances. That's why I came up with my program called 4 Weeks to Healing, which is designing your Hashimoto's lifestyle. I've discussed many times how this is so much more than a thyroid problem. And that getting fixated on thyroid hormone is just not the answer for so many people. The problem is that there are all these other systems of the body that are impacted. And then there's the underlying autoimmunity. And let's face it, a lot of people are self-diagnosing, they're buying supplements based on advice they get in support groups or what they've read online. I see a lot of people do this. Sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't. And the problem is that Hashimoto's is so unbelievably complicated sometimes that you might wind up getting advice that doesn't really apply to your unique set of circumstances. And you might be missing where the real problem is. So in this program I created, the first part of the program is really, let's learn about how to do a proper self-assessment. Right? Because a lot of people just ignore this, but this is super important. So I want to teach you how to do self-diagnosis. I give you these self-diagnosis worksheets, how to do it accurately, so you take the guesswork out of it. And also, if you've read my book, I created a system in the book called the APART system. Right, that's really designed to help us is a formula for biohacking, essentially. Right? And we need to do this with all the major systems of the body and the brain. So let's figure out what's going on. Let's give you the right tools so you can clearly see where it is and know how to fix it. And let's kind of demystify all these layers and layers of problems. The second thing we know, we talked about this today, is that diet really is the foundation of success. Right? And that certain dietary triggers, the things we cut out and eliminate, like gluten and sugar and other foods that may cause flare-ups, are part of the problem. And there are lots of different diets out there. There's always different versions of paleo and all these other things. And this diet that I'm recommending, I've found it really works. But as we've seen today, it's very nuanced also. And the process is itself kind of very important. Because we want to make sure that each of the steps, we are using to maximum potential. right? Like, for example, like during the elimination phase, it's not just about eliminating. It's also about healing the gut, detoxifying, cleaning the liver, addressing other areas like blood sugar issues, adrenal issues, your brain, the immune system. And now with today's discussion, we can see that the reintroduction phase is also a major opportunity to help recalibrate the immune system. We need to take advantage of these opportunities. So in Module 2 of my program, we'll explore this in a lot more depth. And by the way, we'll put together some of the nonsense too of like, this goitrogen issue. I'm going to say, you can't have goitrogens. Well, I don't agree with that, and I'll explain to you why. And you'll also discover how to make this transition to this diet and this lifestyle in a sensible way. Another thing I see so often is that adrenal issues and stress can totally torpedo our progress, prevent people from sleeping right, from getting better at all. So you have to have a plan for stress. You have to have practices and techniques for dealing with it. I'm always astonished how many people know stress is a problem, yet they really don't take anywhere near the meaningful actions that they need to. One of my favorite things is real learning means changing your behavior. It's not just hearing something or buying a list of supplements. That's not learning. Some people that becomes their main focus. And really, it's just a distraction from what really needs to be done. And sometimes what really needs to be done is making meaningful changes in your life. And that's not so easy. Right? It took me over 2 years myself to make the changes that I needed to make after I was diagnosed, when I saw that stress was a huge factor. So in Module 3 of the program, we look at some great techniques for overcoming, not just managing stress, and really give you some tools to set in motion, to things to do. And you learn how to do this with kids and with a family and even with a stressful job. Many of us have maxed out our stress cards. So we have to start putting relaxation and fun and things back into our account. Seriously. Another thing that's really important to understand is that a lot of what goes on with Hashimoto's is brain-based. And this can be caused by inflammation and autoimmunity in the gut and in the brain. And we really need to take care of our brains. So another part of the program, I'm bonusing you a program that I have, an additional program called Save Your Brain, which really looks at how to reduce inflammation in the brain, how to support your brain nutritionally. And you're going to get that as part of the program too. And in Module 4, the fourth part of the 4 weeks to healing, we'll cover exercise, because this is something that can be very beneficial for your brain, for stress, for blood sugar balance, for calming the immune system. I'm going to teach you 2 types of exercises. I do both of them, and they made a huge difference for me. One is high intensity, and with Hashimoto's, you need to do that in the right way, not too long. And I'm also going to teach you some awesome Qigong exercises. Qigong is kind of like Tai Chi. It's simple breathing and movement exercises. They're very relaxing, but they're also really helpful in increasing blood flow and strengthening and healing your internal organs, balancing your immune function. And so all of this will be laid out for you. You'll find the link right here in the chat stream. Just click on it and you'll see the whole program. So 4 weeks to healing, designing your Hashimoto's lifestyle, is a 4-week live virtual training program, which we meet every week in an exclusive website that we've just rebuilt for it. And like today, I'll be speaking with you and chatting with you in real time. And like I said, the program consists of 4 modules, and each one builds on the previous one. In the end, you'll have a real blueprint for day-to-day life, a plan for having abundant energy, for getting a good night's sleep, for feeling happy again, energy to get motivated and lose that weight, to make the changes that you need to make. And each module is 60 minutes plus of content. I've added a bunch more. And we'll also be learning these things that are essential, for this process. And as I always do, there will be a 30 to 60 minute Q&A afterwards, where I'll be answering all your questions live, and you get an opportunity to get personal support from me, to break through some of those challenges and barriers that you may encounter in the process, because invariably things come up. And each week you'll also be given a few crucial action items that will help you implement the training and put it immediately to work. Also, there'll be an opportunity, if you want, to pair up with someone else in the group, kind of create an accountability partnership, so you guys can support each other and encourage each other to make these changes and modifications in your life. You have something very rare here, and that's the circumstances that propel change. You know, I really wish I had something like this when my health crashed. I had to piece it together like a blind man. I knew for my own self that my lifestyle wasn't supporting me. For 2 years I knew. I had to do something, but I couldn't really figure out what it was. You know, I was working, my partner is the love of my life, and it was killing our relationship. I didn't have time for my kids. I didn't have time for any of the things I enjoyed doing because I was just too sick or too tired to do any of them when I did have downtime. And I never had time for exercise or fun. I just didn't even have the energy. And I know many of you have gone through that in some form. So if you're like me or many of the people I've worked with, then you may be in that uncomfortable place or possibly even in real pain. You're really suffering. And chances are if you're here, you're looking for answers. So now is the best time to go all in. Take advantage of this opportunity. This program will begin Tuesday, February 9th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. That's next Tuesday, the first day of the Chinese New Year, Year of the Monkey. You know, most people go about this kind of like ass backwards, where instead of having the plan first and getting the right team to carry it out, they do the opposite. They like just try and figure it all out and then sort of make it up as they go along. Well, you should really have a foundation built first. Then whatever you do, whatever doctor you work with or practitioner, they can come on and add to that foundation. You know, last year I did an interview with Dr. Tis Karazian, and one thing we both agreed on during that interview was that at the end of the day, the most successful things in treating Hashimoto's are diet and lifestyle changes. So many people are looking for the right drug or the right supplement, when really the real answer is the things we do every day. All right, so what's it going to cost you to join the 4 Weeks to Healing Designing Hashimoto's Lifestyle? Well, here's what I'm going to do today. Normally this program is $497 for the program itself and $697 if you want to work one-on-one with me as part of it. Well, today, because I believe in rewarding people who are action takers, and mostly it's selfish because those are the people that get the best results and those are the people I want to work with, I'm going to reward you if you take action right now. You can join us in this program, be part of the group, get all the content and the weekly Q&A with me for a single payment of $297. That's $200 off the normal price. And I'm only offering it today for people who are attending this webinar. And if you want to add the case review with me, where I evaluate all the systems of your body and your brain, I now analyze your lab results, I create a detailed action plan for you, also take $200 off that today. So that will be only one payment of $497. I don't want money to be an obstacle here for you to find real solutions and to help create this foundation that we're talking about. So that's $297 to be part of the group program, or $497 to get the program and one-on-one with me. And just bear in mind, because this program does include personal interaction with me, I have a limited number of spots. So it fills up fast. We've got a bunch of people who are already registered. So here's the deal. I'm really committed to you succeeding, and to prove it, I have a great guarantee, and I also have 5 awesome bonuses that I want to add to this. First, let's take a look at these bonuses. Firstly, we've got some awesome people who are participating in the program and helping to teach. Mickey Trescott, who's the author of the brilliant Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook, is our guest teacher. She teaches how to implement the Autoimmune Paleo Protocol, how to transition from your current life and kitchen. It's a great interviews and talked with her. And she tells her own personal story, which is really moving. Plus, as a bonus, you get a copy of that Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook. And if you haven't checked it out, it's great. You get lists of foods to eat and avoid, has meal plans, fantastic recipes. And all of this, we'll teach how to adapt to Hashimoto's and then add, of course, all this oral tolerance stuff that we've introduced today and how to use that. And I'm going to teach you how to do the whole reintroduction phase. Secondly, Adam Tin, who's the author of the #1 bestseller, Stress is Optional. Here's Adam. We'll be teaching his proven system for not just managing stress, but actually conquering it and overcoming it in your life. So your life is not ruled by it. Adam is a good friend. He used to be a 911 dispatcher. I mean, you talk about the Grand Central Station of stress. Oh my goodness. He knows stress. He knows what to do about it. So As a bonus, you get a free copy of his book too, and you get some of his insights, which are really awesome. The book has great techniques for developing stress-eliminating practices. It has wonderful meditations. And we'll work with you to show you how to make this also an integral part of your life. Not just learn about it, but how to make it, put it into action. Third bonus is a free copy of my video series on meditations, affirmations, Qigong exercises. And these are specially chosen for issues around Hashimoto's. The fourth bonus is you get free access to my Save the Brain from Hashimoto's program. So we don't just cover some of it in there, but we really look at how the brain is impacted, how to assess the brain, both from a functional standpoint and a nutritional standpoint. All of that included as a bonus. The final bonus of the first 10 people who enroll will get a free 30-minute session with me, regardless if you choose the higher price or not. You can ask me whatever you want during that 30 minutes, and we'll work on tailoring your plan for your unique set of challenges. And here's the guarantee. With this, I'm offering a 14-day unconditional satisfaction guarantee, which means you get to go through the first 2 modules with us, and after 2 weeks, if you aren't totally blown away and you don't love it, then just email me and say, you know what, I'm not thrilled with this, and I'll refund your money. But I'll tell you this, be honest, I never get people requesting refunds from me because I don't know anyone else who is so passionate about this and so devoted to educating and sharing this stuff with people. Like, this literally is my passion on a daily basis. You know, because I don't want you to be dependent on me. I want to give you the tools that you need to do this yourself. Like, that's critical, I think. I want to empower you. Because remission is an achievable goal, but not if you don't know how to get there, and not if you haven't laid a foundation that can keep you there, because that's the other part. Part was getting there, part's keeping you there. So my guarantee is simple. If you don't love it after 2 straight weeks in the program, let us know. But if you do stay with us past those 14 days, that means I know you're committed and you belong in this program. And who doesn't belong? Well, this isn't for you if you want a quick fix and you aren't willing to do the work and make the changes in your life that we're talking about implementing. This is really an opportunity for self-transformation, like I said. You know, so if you just want to hear information and not want to do anything with it, then this isn't for you. This really is a plan for real learning. And I would love it if you would join us in the program. There's a link here in the chat stream, and we're also going to send you one by email, so you'll get it 2 options. Just click on that and enroll. And, you know, I urge you to just make a decision. Make it a yes or make it a no. Ever notice that language around decisions, like take a decision or make a decision? I always prefer make a decision. Because if you make it, you're responsible. It's your creation. When you take a decision, it's like someone else gives you that option. Make a decision. Okay. Let's go to my last point on oral tolerance, and then we're going to open things up for Q&A. The last thing I want to talk about really is the importance of commitment. For some reason, no one ever talks about this in reference to your health, but it's hugely important. Hashimoto's is one heck of an opponent. It really is. And I think the reason a lot of people don't really have success in getting it in remission is that this requires a certain level of vigilance and commitment. You know, people often talk with people that say, yeah, I was following the diet, I made some of those changes in my life, and then, I don't know, I didn't stick with it. Well, here's the thing. You can't treat this like some fad that you forget about after a few months. This is a long-term project. And there's too much at stake here. This is a progressive disease. And where it progresses is not a place you ever want to go. Trust me, I've seen people and worked with people who are there. One of my favorite quotes on commitment is by Peter Drucker. He says, unless commitment is made, there are only promises and hopes, but no plans. And that's it. The stakes are too high here for there to only be promises and hopes. Promises and hopes, you know, get you falling into a sinkhole that's harder and harder to get out of. We need commitment so we can create that plan that will lead to you getting meaningful change and getting a lot better. You know, the other thing I've learned is the one thing that sometimes prevents people from getting the results they want is they simply don't do enough. In this contest, half measures don't give you half results. They wind up giving you really disappointing results, or sometimes worse than that, like no results at all. It's so frustrating. So whatever you decide to do, whoever you decide to work with, whatever approach you choose, please give it your all. Commit. And I want us all to get this thing in remission. And I want us to go beyond remission. I want to raise the ceiling of what is possible. And that happens inside your head. It doesn't happen from supplements or from diet. It comes from really changing your thinking and your default thought and your default behavior. This is an inside job. We are all in this together, and there are so many more of us out there who need our help, who need our guidance, and who need people to set an example for them. So let's set the example. Awesome, people. All right. That's where we're going to end it tonight. Again, link in the chat if you want to join us. We'll send you an email also. We have a limited number of spots for the program. I already have about half the spots filled. I want to be able to work with you one-on-one, so please join us. It's been an honor and a privilege to spend this time with you here tonight. And if you got questions, please stick around. I'm happy to answer them. I'll be here as long as it takes to answer your questions. We're going to go to live feed now. I'm Marc Ryan, a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist from Hashimoto'sHealing.com. Be good, be kind, and remember to have compassion for everyone, including yourself.